My name is Olivia Walker. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, my own family called me useless, someone with no voice, no place at their table. But on the night of my brother's wedding, something shifted. The stares, the whispers, the laughter at my worn dress, they all cut deep, but I carried something no one expected. A truth I had built in silence, waiting for the moment they would try to break me once more. And when Nathan mocked me in front of everyone I knew this time, I wouldn't bow my head. I would make them listen. What happened in that ballroom changed everything. And I promise by the end, you'll see why none of them will ever look at me the same again. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to finally speak when everyone told you to stay silent? The afternoon sun blazed over Houston, striking the Walker estate until every pane of glass and strip of chrome turned into a mirror of blinding light. Along the gravel drive, luxury cars stood in perfect formation. Mercedes with their sleek lines, a Porsche gleaming like polished steel, even a Rolls-Royce that looked as though it had never seen dust. They seemed less like vehicles and more like banners, each one a declaration of wealth and power. I parked and let my hands rest for a moment on the steering wheel, the rough texture warm under my palms. The laughter of passing guests carried across the gravel, their heels clicking in sharp rhythm, each sound reminding me of the distance between their world and mine. When I finally opened the door, it groaned against the silence that followed, and I stepped out, smoothing my navy dress as though the gesture alone could shield me from their glances. Their eyes flicked toward me, curious, dismissive, and then slid away, already seeking brighter company. For a moment I stood there, not beside the car, but beneath the crushing weight of their indifference, knowing I was about to cross a threshold where I had never truly been welcome. Elegant music drifted from the grand hall ahead, the swell of violins filling the air, as though to proclaim this was not a place for outsiders. My chest tightened as though every breath carried more weight than it should. Guests swept past me. Their glances were fleeting, cool, and a few even curved into polite smiles edged with disdain. I could see it in their eyes, that mix of curiosity and mockery, the way one might study a misplaced figure who had wandered into forbidden ground. For a moment I felt like a shadow standing outside the golden glow, shut out from their dazzling circle. I gripped the worn leather strap of my bag. Its familiar weight steadied me. It wasn't beautiful, wasn't expensive, but it was mine, faithful, enduring. In this world of excess, at least I carried something that belonged solely to me. Even the air here felt different, dense, heavy with perfume, thick with power and expectation. And I knew without doubt I no longer belonged within it. Just as I reached the entrance, a low engine growl behind me made me freeze. I didn't need to turn to recognize the sound. A sleek black Bentley slid into place, its tires crunching the gravel, stopping with practiced arrogance before the gates. Nathan stepped out. His tailored suit clung to his frame with surgical precision like a second skin. In his hand, already poised, a glass of champagne, the kind most would be served, but which Nathan carried as a mere accessory. He looked at me, then deliberately let his gaze fall to my battered Ford. His mouth curved into a slow, disdainful smile. He didn't need to speak. That single look was enough to unearth every humiliation of my childhood, all the comparisons, all the dismissals, all the times I had been called useless. Those wounds never truly healed. They only waited for a glance like this to rip open again. Nathan sauntered toward a group of friends, casual, smug. Raising his voice just enough for me to hear, he said, "I'm surprised that the old thing even still runs." Laughter burst out sharp and cutting, ricocheting in my ears, spreading through my chest like needles piercing straight into my pride. I stood, rooted, heat flooding my face, my knuckles whitening as I clutched my bag strap. My lips trembled, but my eyes never left Nathan. I fixed his arrogant smirk into memory, and in my mind one cold, clear thought resounded, "Go on, laugh. Soon enough you'll choke on it." Turning away, I pushed through the wrought iron gates, their curling designs mocking me with their elegance. Inside, brilliance poured from the ballroom, thick with the scent of extravagance. I walked in, each step heavy but steady. My heart pounded hard, but not with the fear of years past. I was no longer the little sister pushed aside at family gatherings. Not tonight. Tonight was different. Tonight I entered with fire in my chest. Amid the clinking glasses and practiced smiles, I would stand tall, and I would make every one of them, Nathan my father, all of them hear me. The moment I stepped into the grand hall, the air shifted, pressing against me like a heavy curtain. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the high ceiling, each facet catching the light, until the room shimmered like a frozen constellation. The banquet tables stretched in perfect rows, clothed in white silk and crowned with silverware polished so carefully they reflected the glow of the candles above. Perfume hung thick in the air, cloying and sweet, mingling with bursts of laughter that rang sharp and loud, almost aggressive. This had once been my grandfather Walter Walker's home, where evenings smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and were filled with the deep rumble of his voice telling stories. Now it was no longer a home, it was a theater, a stage for power plays and displays of wealth. The warmth of memory had been stripped away, replaced by posturing. At the head table, my father sat as though carved from granite. Richard Walker, 62. Tall and broad-shouldered, every line of his suit cut to perfection. The navy wool lay against him like armor, and his eyes, cool and precise, moved over the room like a surveyor claiming land. Once long ago I had clung to him for comfort after my mother died. He had been my shield, my anchor. That was another lifetime. Now between us stretched not just distance, but a canyon so wide I could barely see the other side. Even here at a wedding meant for joy, he had stacked a neat pile of business documents beside his plate, a reminder that his empire never paused. I walked past the tables, my steps measured, though my palms had grown clammy. When I drew close enough, his gaze lifted to me. It skimmed from the scuffed leather at the back of my shoes to the navy dress I had worn more times than I cared to count. His mouth curved not in warmth, but in something sharp-edged. His voice pitched low, yet perfectly aimed, so the nearest tables could catch every syllable. I still don't know how to dress properly, Olivia. After all these years, you still haven't learned what it means to be a walker. The words landed like a stone in my chest. Around him, laughter stirred a ripple of amusement spreading like oil on water. My Aunt Sophia leaned toward her companion, her voice silky and cutting. She doesn't belong here at all, does she? My lungs tightened until every breath scraped against my ribs. It was an old pain, too familiar, the sting of being diminished in front of others. I wanted to answer back, to say with a steady voice that silk gowns and polished shoes did not measure worth, that a woman could be more than the labels sewn into her clothing. But I did not. My lips shaped a small practiced smile, polite, hollow, my eyes fixed not on his, but on some point just beyond him. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. The noise around me swelled again, chatter and toasts, the music lifting above it all, but my ears buzzed with the echo of his words. My body felt stiff, as if every joint had locked into place. Slowly, deliberately, I turned away, choosing the table I knew had been set for me, a small round one at the far edge of the hall. It had been placed in the shadows, away from the orbit of the head table. Perhaps that was their intention, to set me apart, to remind me again of my position. I lowered myself into the chair, the wood cool beneath my palms, and laid my worn leather case across my lap. My fingers traced the softened grain back and forth, a rhythm that steadied me even as the voices in the hall sliced at me like shards of glass. I could almost hear my mother, then her voice carried on memory, gentle yet firm. "One day, sweetheart, you will find your voice again." I let the words fill me, pressing against the ache, anchoring me in a way no silk gown ever could. Tonight, beneath the glitter of chandeliers and the weight of their judgment, I understood something with a clarity that chilled and steadied me at once. That day my mother spoke of was no longer some distant promise. It had come. It was here, and I was ready. The ballroom still echoed inside me, its laughter sharp, its perfume cloying, even as I stepped into the garden beyond the great house. Out here the air was warmer, carrying the scent of roses heavy with bloom, but my chest still felt tight. The cicadas hummed from the hedges, steady and relentless. as though reminding me that the world did not pause for my shame. I walked the stone path, its lamps throwing soft amber circles onto the ground, and lowered myself onto a bench near the pond. The stone was cool beneath me, seeping through the thin fabric of my dress, an anchor against the storm still thrashing inside. I leaned forward, elbows against my knees, hands folded in my lap. My father's voice still rang in my ears, low and cutting, a reminder that to him I had never been enough. Around it I heard my aunt's hiss of agreement, the ripple of mocking laughter from those who were too eager to follow his lead. My throat ached with the words I had swallowed, the ones I had rehearsed for years, but still could not bring myself to speak in that hall. For a moment I closed my eyes, letting the breeze skim over my face, trying to breathe past the bitterness. That was when I sensed it, a figure standing just beyond the ring of lamplight. I tensed my hand, brushing the worn leather of my briefcase beside me. Then he stepped forward, and relief softened the knot in my chest. Robert. My uncle looked older than the man I remembered from childhood. Silver streaked his hair. His face was lined by the weight of years, but his presence was as steady as ever. He wore no finery, just a plain shirt tucked neatly at the waist, shoes scuffed by use, not polished for display. In this place amid chandeliers and silk, his simplicity felt almost radical. His eyes met mine, with a warmth I had not felt all evening. He sat beside me without asking. The bench dipped with his weight, grounding me. For a long while we shared the silence, broken only by the whisper of leaves and the soft tremor of water in the pond. Then his voice, low, patient, familiar, cut through. Olivia. Your father and Nathan will not stop. To them your quiet is a weakness. And tonight, Nathan, he will not miss the chance to make you bleed in front of everyone. My fingers curled tight in my lap. The anger rose hot, sharper than grief, because it was old, worn into me by years of practice. My voice came unsteady, raw. Do you think I don't know? Since I was a child. Uncle, every look, every word. It was always a blade. He never let me forget what I wasn't. Robert's hand settled lightly on my shoulder. Not heavy, not claiming, just steady. He met my gaze, his own lined with something fierce beneath the calm. Tonight is different. The hall is full of family and partners who carry stories like seeds. If Nathan shames you here, it will grow far beyond these walls. I turned away from him toward the pond. The water rippled under the touch of wind moonlight, splintering across its surface like broken glass. He was right, of course. Nathan had always known where to strike. He had a gift for cruelty, a way of smiling as he pressed his heel into the softest part of me. And tonight, with every eye trained on him, he would do it with relish. But something had changed. The girl who once shrank under their contempt was gone. What remained was a woman tempered by fire, one who had built her life outside their reach. My leather case pressed into my thigh, its edges softened by years of use, and I traced its grain with my fingers. Inside were papers, contracts, proof of what I had built in silence. Not scraps, not illusions, but substance. It was my shield, and if need be, it would be my sword. I drew a deep breath, filling my lungs with the mingled scents of roses and damp earth. The night wrapped around me, and when I looked at Robert again, my voice no longer trembled. Let him try. Let him call me names, laugh at my dress, sneer at my work. But when I stand, when I show them what I carry, their laughter will choke. Every word will turn to ash in their mouths. Robert's lips lifted in a faint smile. It wasn't amusement, it was pride. He didn't argue. He only nodded, his silence louder than any encouragement. For a moment I saw in his eyes the same faith my grandfather once had, a quiet conviction that steadied me more than all the glittering chandeliers inside ever could. The cicadas' hum seemed to soften the reflection on the pond, steadied, and the garden around me grew still, as though the night itself recognized what was hardening in me. I was no longer fumbling for a voice. I had one. And I was prepared to use it not for their approval, but for my own truth. Yet as I sat there, the scent of roses drifted stronger on the breeze, and with it came something else. A memory sudden and sharp. I was 13 again, standing in the old dining room with its long oak table and heavy drapes. Nathan had leaned across the table, smirking as he told the cousins how I had failed in school, how I was too soft, too slow. My cheeks had burned, then my father's silence sealing the shame. Only Robert had placed a hand on my shoulder, whispering that one day my voice would matter. That memory rose like smoke in the garden air wrapping around me, reminding me that tonight was not just another humiliation waiting to happen. It was the reckoning of every silence I had endured. I opened my eyes, fixing them on the trembling reflection of the moon. Tomorrow they will push me. Tomorrow Nathan will strike. But this time I would not fall. I was ready. Back inside the hall, the chandeliers scattered light across the polished floor, and Nathan's laugh carried above the hum of polite conversation. He stood in the center of attention, playing host, as though he owned the night, while my father occupied the head table, regal, and still surveying the room as if it belonged to him. I stayed in the shadows at a table far from theirs, my fingers resting on the worn leather of my case. The cool texture grounded me for a moment, but then a memory rose without permission, sharp and merciless. It was 2019, and I was 27. Back then, I had just begun building my small organic foods company, 6 months of restless nights and unpaid bills, but with a passion that kept me going. The family had gathered at the headquarters of Walker Timber, a vast building that reeked of both old money and ambition. I remembered the conference room, long and severe, the walls lined with oil portraits of our ancestors, men who had carved their wealth from the forests, with an axe in one hand and contracts in the other. That day my father's voice rang with authority as he announced his latest venture, an ambitious logging project in Brazil. I had read the preliminary reports again and again, every word screaming of danger. The political climate was unstable, the economy unpredictable, and the logistics of transporting timber across such terrain seemed impossible. It was a gamble too large for anyone to stomach. My palms had been slick with sweat as I rose to speak. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Father, this project is too dangerous. If the market shifts, if politics change, the company could lose everything. Instead of expanding recklessly, shouldn't we invest in upgrading domestic facilities? Build something sustainable here at home?" For a second, silence reigned, the kind of silence that makes your pulse ring in your ears. Then Nathan's laugh cracked through it, loud and cruel. "And what could you possibly know about international investment, Liv? You can barely run a produce stand." His smirk had been the same one he wore tonight, dripping with contempt. Sophia followed her voice, honeyed the edges sharp enough to cut. "Olivia, dear, you own 2% of this company. Who exactly do you think is going to listen to you?" My nails dug into the wood of the table, my knuckles white. I had tried to steady my voice. "I've read every report, every detail. I'm not making this up." My father's expression shifted, the mask of civility falling away to reveal the cold authority that had built an empire. His hand slammed against the mahogany table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous room. "Enough, Olivia. You are wasting everyone's time. Get out." The air rushed from my lungs, the world blurring as if the floor itself tilted beneath me. I searched the faces around the table, hoping for one ally, one word spoken in my defense. None came. Even Robert, my uncle, who had always been kind, lowered his eyes, his silence a heavy weight pressing against my chest. My feet carried me toward the door in a haze, and when it closed behind me with a heavy thud, it felt like the final stroke of a gavel. My place had been stripped from me, in that instant my voice dismissed as nothing more than childish noise. The months that followed proved my warnings right. Brazil collapsed. The project bled Walker Timber of tens of millions of failures splashed across every financial page, a humiliation whispered in business circles. And yet not a single acknowledgement came my way. No apology, no recognition, not even a fleeting glance of regret from those who had silenced me. I remained the useless daughter, the one without a voice, the girl who had dared to question the patriarch and had been thrown aside for it. Sitting now in the wedding hall, surrounded by crystal and roses, The echo of that moment still ached in my ribs. I could almost hear Nathan's laugh again, Sophia's silky dismissal, my father's hand striking the table. The pain had dulled with time, but it had not disappeared. It lived in me, etched into my bones, reminding me of the day I was cast out of the room where decisions were made. But tonight was different. Tonight I sat with my case resting against my leg, not empty but filled with the proof of who I had become since that day. The music shifted, the DJ's voice rising to announce the next turn of the evening, the dance and celebration that would carry Nathan into his new life. Around me, glasses clinked, laughter surged again, but I felt steady. I remembered walking out of that boardroom in 2019 with my face burning and my throat raw, convinced I had been broken. What I had not seen then was that the rejection was not an ending but a beginning. They had closed one door, and I had built another with my own hands. Every hour of work, every setback endured, every risk I had taken since then had brought me to this night. As I sat in the dim corner of the hall, I felt the past and present press against each other. I had been expelled from the chamber of power, my words dismissed as meaningless. But this time, under the watch of every relative and every guest, I would not be shoved aside. This time I would rise, and when I did, they would have no choice but to hear me. The music surged, relentless, pulling me back into the present. I sat at a table tucked into the far end of the ballroom, far from the gleam of the head table, from where I could take in the spectacle in its full, overwhelming detail. Candlelight shimmered across crystal goblets like 1,000 restless stars. The chandeliers above, dripping with glass and gold, scattered light over the polished floor, where guests glided with an ease born of privilege. Emily, glowing in pure white silk, floated from group to group with the grace of a queen, her gown brushing softly as if it commanded the air itself. The room pulsed with extravagance, roses imported from Europe spilling their fragrance into the air. Champagne from France poured without pause, waiters circulating like shadows carrying silver trays. Every conversation wove itself into a tapestry of deals and dividends, laughter loud enough to declare wealth, but sharp enough to remind outsiders of their place. Sitting there, I felt like a shadow myself, barely discernible against the glittering backdrop. A server approached with silent precision, setting down a plate so artfully arranged it looked like a painting, thin slivers of salmon nestled among edible flowers. The aroma was subtle, delicate, meant to be admired before consumed. Yet no one glanced at me. Their attention was fixed toward the front where Nathan and my father sat. Glasses raised the center of the universe in this gilded hall. It struck me then with painful clarity I was meant to be invisible. The small table at the far end of the room was not an oversight. It was a placement, a message, a reminder. As I traced the rim of my glass, the cool stem grounding me, I let my eyes wander. A cousin laughed too loudly at one of Nathan's jokes, tossing his head back as though auditioning for approval. A group of business associates leaned close, whispering numbers disguised as compliments. The air shimmered with wealth, with alliances sealed by crystal clinks and staged smiles. And I sat apart, watching it all as though through glass, present, yet not permitted to belong. Then a flash of crimson entered my vision. Sophia. She moved with the poise of someone who had spent a lifetime under chandeliers, her dress hugging her frame with calculated precision. A diamond necklace large enough to catch even the most distracted gaze glittered at her throat. She didn't so much walk as glide, her perfume arriving before her words. She leaned down slightly, her smile graceful, her eyes sharpened like a blade hidden in silk. "Olivia," she said sweetly, "you're still running that little food company, aren't you? I hear most of those startups collapse within a few years. I do worry about you." The words dripped honey, but every syllable pierced like a needle. I steadied myself. My lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "Thank you, Sophia. I'm doing just fine." Her brows lifted, the diamonds at her ears catching the light. She let her gaze drift over my navy dress, my simple shoes, before settling back on me with a smirk that spoke louder than words. "Fine," she repeated softly. "You're seated at the back of the hall in a dress I know I've seen before after arriving in that car of yours. If this is what fine looks like, I can hardly imagine what failure must mean. Her tone remained lilting, amused, as though she had delivered a compliment. Around us, no one turned yet. I felt the invisible weight of imagined ears, the way her cruelty was meant to spread quietly, like a rumor slipping through cracks. Heat climbed my neck, flooding my face. My first instinct was silence to endure, as I had countless times before. But something in me shifted. I set my fork down, slowly raised my head, and met her gaze. My smile widened just enough to unsettle her. "You're right, Sophia," I said evenly. "Not everyone can understand what fine really means. Sometimes it takes the ground shifting when balance tilts in ways you never expected." Her eyes flickered just for an instant before she scoffed and tossed her hair back, retreating with a haughty laugh. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks against the marble floor as she vanished into the swell of chatter, already seeking a new audience. I leaned back, inhaling slowly, steadying the heat that still burned beneath my skin. The chandeliers glittered above, the roses perfumed the air, the violins carried on, and yet the hall felt colder somehow. The laughter around me blurred too, rehearsed, too brittle a chorus of masks. Sophia's words stung, but less than they once would have. They no longer cut deep enough to draw blood. Instead, they revealed something else. Her cruelty was not strength, but desperation, a mask more fragile than she realized. Still, I could not shake the memory her words stirred. A smaller me years ago, sitting at another family table, while Sophia whispered to cousins about my thrift store shoes, my father pretending not to hear. Nathan's smirks at every jab. I remembered lowering my head, then cheeks burning, swallowing humiliation in silence. Tonight those ghosts pressed against me, but they did not crush me. I closed my eyes briefly, and in the din of the ballroom, I almost heard my mother's voice again, gentle, steady, urging me to endure. I almost felt my grandfather's hand on my shoulder, solid as stone. And with that, the shame Sophia wanted to kindle turned instead to something else, resolve. When I opened my eyes, I felt it, the leather case pressed against my side, familiar and grounding. Silent, unassuming, and alive with the power of every night I had worked alone, every contract signed, every risk that had brought me here. It was more than paper. It was the truth I carried. Nathan would try. He always did. He would choose his moment, sharpen his words like blades, draw every eye in the room, and then strike. That was who he was. But this time, I would not flinch. I exhaled long and slow, letting the sound of laughter and clinking glasses wash past me, meaningless. My heart beat steady. My mind was clear. Sophia's venom was nothing compared to what Nathan was preparing. And when his moment came, when he thought he had built the perfect stage to humiliate me, I would be ready. Ready to show him and all of them a version of me they had tried to erase. A version that had survived their scorn and grown stronger in silence. A version they could no longer deny. The clinking of crystal glasses rang out as the band shifted from a lively tune into the opening chords of a classic love song. Conversation hushed, and all eyes in the ballroom turned to the stage. Nathan and Emily walked forward, bathed in the golden glow of the chandeliers, hand in hand, ready to give their toast. I sat quietly at my table in the corner, the laughter and chatter blurring into a distant hum. A knot of dread twisted in my stomach. I knew what was coming. Nathan never let an opportunity like this pass. He lifted the microphone, his smile dazzling, every gesture polished for the crowd. His voice, warm and practiced, carried easily across the hall. "Tonight is the most important night of my life. I am grateful to my father, to our family, and to all the friends who have believed in us and stood beside us." He paused, letting the words settle, then added with a deliberate weight, "And there is one more person who deserves mention. Someone I am sure you all know." His eyes found me in the crowd, sharp and unyielding. A chill slid down my spine. He let the silence stretch before his lips curled into a smirk. "That is my sister Olivia. She has always been unique. So unique, in fact, that all these years she has never managed to hold a proper job, still drives that old wreck of a car, and showed up tonight in a gown that looks like it came from the clearance rack." Laughter rippled through the tables nearest the stage, growing louder as people exchanged amused glances. From somewhere close, I heard a whisper the words slicing through the din with surgical precision. Useless, with no voice. The same words my father had flung at me years ago, seared into my memory, now resurrected in front of everyone. The air pressed heavy against my chest, each breath jagged, as if my ribs were being pried apart. But my hands did not tremble. Instead, my fingers tightened around the handle of my leather case, the grain rough beneath my palm. I did not cry. I did not run. Slowly, I pushed back my chair. The scrape of wood against marble cut through the laughter, drawing curious glances. My legs carried me forward, steady, deliberate, as the murmur of voices swelled around me. Nathan's eyebrows rose, amusement dancing in his eyes. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had won. But as I reached the edge of the stage, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me like armor. I lifted my chin, my mouth softening into a calm smile that unsettled him, a smile that did not belong to a woman defeated. The room grew still, the guests leaning in, waiting for the spectacle they assumed would follow. I stopped the stage lights spilling across me, hundreds of eyes fixed in expectation. When I opened my mouth, my voice carried not a quiver but a steady resonance that surprised even me. You are right, Nathan. I have been silent for too long. But tonight, I have something to show you and everyone here. I turned to the small table beside the stage and set down my leather case. Inside were the fruits of 3 relentless years' documents and proof of a life rebuilt from the ashes they had left me in. My fingers lingered on the clasp for a heartbeat, and I felt the weight of the ballroom pressing closer every breath in the room held. I stood tall, the heat of the lights on my face, the murmur of anticipation thick in the air. And in that instant, I knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. The ballroom seemed to freeze around me. The chatter, the clinking glasses, even the music softened to a faint hum that barely lingered in the background. Every gaze shifted toward me as though I stood in the center of a courtroom, the jury already waiting to hear its verdict. Nathan folded his arms, his mouth curled into that condescending smile he had perfected over the years, certain I would crumble in front of him. Across the room, my father leaned back in his chair, cold eyes fixed on me, anticipating the spectacle of my humiliation. I steadied my breath and reached for the old leather case resting against my side. Its worn handle had become familiar to my hand, the only constant companion in years of rejection and silence. With a deliberate slowness, I pressed the clasp. The metallic snap echoed louder than it should have, cutting into the stillness of the hall like a gavel striking wood. From inside, I withdrew a thick folder, its spine reinforced with hardboard utterly plain against the glittering silver cutlery and lavish floral arrangements surrounding us. I placed it on the table between Nathan and me, letting it sit there for a moment as the weight of its presence spread across the room. Inside this folder, I began, my voice firm and steady, is the latest valuation report from a global auditing firm. The sustainable foods company I built, the one you all dismissed as a childish hobby, is now valued at $240 million. My personal assets outside of the company amount to $95 million. The silence broke like glass. A wave of whispers surged across the tables, some sharp, some incredulous. Sophia shot to her feet, her diamond necklace catching the light as her eyes widened. That cannot be true, Olivia. You are making this up to draw attention. Her words were honeyed with disbelief but laced with venom. I met her stare without flinching. If you think so, then read it yourself. These files contain investment agreements from 3 major California venture capital firms, complete with legal certifications. Nathan's face, smug, only seconds before lost its color. He let out a forced laugh, shallow and brittle. A cheap trick, Olivia. You really think a pile of paper can change the fact that you are still the same useless girl who never found her voice? I slid the folder closer to him, the movement deliberate, my tone cold and unyielding. Open it, Nathan. Read it. Then tell me again who the useless one really is. For the first time that evening, his confidence cracked. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the file. He fumbled with the cover, then bent his head scanning the printed pages. I watched his lips part as he read the figures, the seals, the signatures of names even he could not dismiss. The smugness drained from his face, leaving him pale, the sweat rising at his hairline. His mouth opened as though to form words, but nothing emerged, only a faint broken exhale. I rose to my full height, letting my gaze sweep across the hall over relatives, friends, and business partners alike, their expressions shifting from curiosity to stunned disbelief. Nathan once said I had no voice. I declared my voice calm yet resonant enough to carry. Tonight, hear me clearly. From this moment forward, I not only have a voice, I have power, and I will use it to protect the legacy of this family, a legacy some of you have been so eager to squander. The room erupted. Some gasped, some whispered furiously, a few even clapped hesitant but undeniable. Eyes that once skimmed past me now turned sharp and searching, weighing me anew. And in that moment, standing there with the weight of silence finally broken, I felt something I had been denied for years. My voice steady and undeniable, filling the room in a way it never had before. The ballroom erupted around me, no longer the polished sanctuary it had been minutes earlier, but a storm of whispers scraping chairs and the shrill crash of crystal colliding. Every sound pierced like a shard of glass, each voice sharpened by shock and disbelief. Faces turned toward me. Some wide-eyed with astonishment, others twisted with that cruel kind of curiosity, people reserved for disasters they secretly enjoy watching. A few guests lifted their phones under the cover of napkins, capturing the scene, as if I were some spectacle on trial. Sophia stepped forward, her crimson gown hugging her frame, her smile still painted though her eyes glimmered with venom. She tilted her head, voice sweet and poisonous at once. "Olivia is just trying to stir trouble," she crooned. "Don't fall for it. A failure like her could never have millions." Her words floated over the crowd like perfume gone sour, but their intended effect faltered. Already sharp-eyed businessmen were flipping through the papers, murmuring at familiar names, at recognizable seals of venture firms. Their brows furrowed, their heads tilted, and quiet nods began to ripple across the tables. One silver-haired man leaned to his neighbor, his voice low yet cutting through the din. "If these documents are genuine, then Olivia's holdings rival the entire Walker estate." That single sentence dropped like a stone into water, its ripples unsettling even those determined not to believe. Nathan's composure cracked. His face blazed crimson as he slammed a fist against the table, scattering papers into the air like frantic birds. "Enough," he roared the microphone, catching his fury. "This is my wedding, not a stage for your circus." His rage pulsed through the hall, but it only emphasized his unraveling. I did not flinch. My voice, steady and calm, answered him. "I am not performing, Nathan. I am returning every insult you hurled at me for years." Then my father rose. Richard's movements were deliberate, his presence commanding even before he spoke. His eyes, usually cool, burned with a fury I had not seen aimed at me in decades. His voice thundered with disdain. "Olivia, you think a few numbers will force me or this family to kneel. You have no experience, no leadership. Your money means nothing here." His hand flicked dismissively as if shooing away a bothersome insect. I drew in a breath, letting the fragrant roses around us sting my lungs like smoke. Then I turned, meeting his eyes without wavering. "I hold 41% of the company, Father. You hold 39. If there is someone without a voice tonight, it isn't me." The silence that followed was suffocating. It swallowed every whisper, every gasp, until even the chandeliers seemed to hang heavier above our heads. Nathan froze, mouth open, his gaze darting between us in disbelief. Richard clenched his fists, the tendons straining his knuckles, ghost white, but words failed him. For the first time, he did not have the final say. The power shifted, subtle yet unmistakable. The invisible chains that had bound me in silence for years loosened with that single declaration. Around us, the wedding veneer shattered. This was no longer a celebration but a battlefield, its weapons not steel, but balance sheets, contracts, and blood ties strained to breaking. I stood among them, no longer the invisible daughter dismissed as useless, no longer the girl without a voice. In their eyes, for the first time, I was not an afterthought but a force to be reckoned with. And though I knew this war was far from over, I could feel the ground tilt, the tide finally beginning to turn in my favor. The ballroom did not quiet all at once. It sank into silence piece by piece. First the violins faltered, then the low hum of voices dwindled into nervous whispers until even the clinking of silverware seemed hesitant. My leather case rested at my side, its echo still heavy in the air as if the strike I had delivered minutes earlier still reverberated across the marble floor. Nathan sat slack-jawed, pale, his chest rising in shallow bursts. Yet I knew better than to think the battle was over. Richard rose. The anger that had blazed across his face earlier was gone, replaced by something colder, far more dangerous. His mask of serenity was so carefully fitted that it set every instinct in me on edge. He lifted his champagne flute, and with a voice that carried like a benediction, he said, "Everyone, this is not the place for family quarrels. Tonight is meant to celebrate Nathan and Emily. But before we go on, there is something I must say." A few heads turned toward him with relief, as though the patriarch had returned order to the chaos. The chandeliers glinted against his silver hair as he turned to me, his eyes softened with an unfamiliar gentleness. "Olivia," he said, his tone rich with paternal warmth, or the imitation of it, "I underestimated you. What you've built, none of us believed it possible. I am proud, and I want you by my side to take Walker Group to heights we've never seen." Polite applause broke out, scattered hesitant. Some guests leaned into the gesture, eagerly anxious to align themselves with power, no matter which way it shifted. Others clapped, slowly exchanging glances, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. I caught whispers. "She's outplayed them. Richard is folding her in. Or is he—" Nathan's mouth fell open, further stunned at his father's audacity. His hand gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. For the first time that night, he had no words. But when I met Richard's gaze, what I saw was not admiration. It was a calculation. His voice had softened his words, shaped like an olive branch, but his eyes betrayed him cold and hungry. I steadied my voice. "Thank you, Father, but I do not need your cooperation to prove my worth." A ripple ran through the crowd. Not of applause this time, but of unease. A woman at the far table set her glass down too sharply, the sound cracking the silence. A cousin shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. From somewhere behind me I caught the faint hiss of a whisper, "She dares reject him." Richard chuckled softly, lowering his glass to the table with a deliberate calm. "Olivia," he said, shaking his head as though indulging a child, "you are young. Money is but one piece of the puzzle. Experience, connections, influence. I hold all of those. Alone you will be swallowed whole. I only want to protect you." The applause that followed was weaker this time, scattered and uncertain. Guests looked at one another with furrowed brows. I saw a man discreetly tug at his cufflinks, avoiding eye contact. Another woman tapped her fingernails against her champagne glass, as though the sound might distract her from the tension suffocating the room. I drew a slow breath. The heat rose in my chest, but I forced my face to remain calm. My words came out sharpened by years of silence I had been forced to swallow. "If you truly wish to protect me, Father," I said evenly, "you would not have called me useless. You would not have silenced me. I do not need the shield you pretend to offer. I have myself." For the briefest second, Richard faltered. The smile on his lips wavered, a small crack, spreading like stress in glass. But he covered it quickly, the mask slipping back into place, though thinner now, more fragile. Around us, the guests shifted their discomfort, now impossible to hide. One man muttered into his glass of wine, "She's not bending." A young woman near the door clutched her partner's arm, eyes wide, as though she were witnessing not a wedding brunch, but a tribunal. Even the waiters, trained to invisibility, slowed their steps, balancing trays of champagne that trembled under the weight of silence. Richard inclined his head, smiling again, but the glint in his eyes betrayed the truth. His words had been bait, his offer nothing more than a net disguised as generosity. and I had refused it in front of everyone. The music resumed at last, though softer now, uncertain as though the instruments themselves feared breaking the fragile fabric of the moment. Conversations bloomed again, but they carried edges sharp, cautious, filled with unfinished thoughts. Laughter returned brittle and forced, punctuated by the occasional nervous clink of a glass. Yet beneath it all, the tension remained throbbing like a pulse no one could ignore. I sat back down, the polite applause fading in my ears, the leather case warm against my side. My chest rose and fell slowly, but my mind was clear. Richard's so-called truce was not peace. It was war wrapped in silk, a trap disguised as reconciliation. In the space between his smile and my refusal, something had shifted. The line was drawn not in whispers behind boardroom doors, but in front of witnesses sealed under chandeliers, immortalized in the memory of every guest present. Richard thought he could reclaim the ground I had seized, twist my victory into his own. But in truth, he had only revealed his hand too soon. And as the champagne glasses trembled as nervous whispers threaded the hall, I knew with a chilling certainty this was not the end of the fight. It was the beginning of something darker, sharper, and far more dangerous. The final notes of the band dissolved into silence as guests began to pour from the ballroom. Their laughter lingered in the air, brittle and strained as though they were eager to escape the tension that had saturated the night. I sat quietly in a shadowed corner, watching each figure drift past sequined gowns brushing against polished floors, polished shoes, clattering toward the exit. Outside headlights cut the darkness in long white streaks, but inside the air remained heavy, thick with unspoken threats and unfinished battles. It felt less like a wedding reception had ended, and more like a war had paused only to gather breath. My hand closed around the small clutch on my lap, the embossed leather cold and slick against my damp palm. Earlier that night, Richard Walker had stood in full view of the guests, raising his glass, with that warm, calculated smile, offering words of praise that rang hollow even as applause followed. To Olivia he had said, "May her ventures shine as brightly as her spirit." A toast crafted like a compliment but weighted with a warning. The echo of his words pressed against me now, cold and double-edged. I rose to retrieve my coat, the train of conversations thinning as more guests departed. That was when I caught the faintest murmur slipping through the cracked door of a smaller side room. A sliver of light spilled into the dim corridor, beckoning me closer. My pulse quickened as I leaned in, every sense sharpened by instinct. Richard's voice came first, lower than usual, the warmth stripped away and replaced by the steel I knew too well. "She's grown far too bold. Do not worry, Nathan. She thinks a handful of numbers can shield her from me. By tomorrow, the papers will be full of reports exposing her financial missteps, her inflated valuations. I know every editor worth printing ink. This will be nothing more than a whisper before it becomes a storm." My breath hitched. I pressed my body tighter against the wall, the sound of my heart hammering so violently I feared it might betray me. Then came Nathan's reply, his tone coarse, raw with humiliation. "I don't care about the press, Father. I want her gone. Tonight. Make her feel what true disgrace tastes like." Richard's response cut through like a whip. "Silence. Do not be a fool. If you lash out now, you drag us both down. There is a plan. You will wait." I clung to the wall, my knuckles whitening against the clutch I gripped like a lifeline. The urge to storm into the room to confront them head-on boiled inside me. Yet a colder instinct, the very one they always underestimated, forced me still. I absorbed every syllable, each word searing into me like blows I could not deflect. Richard's voice returned steady and measured, laced with malice. "Tomorrow I will call old allies. They will leak just enough to cast doubt, nothing more. Rumors of an investigation into her company's finances, whispers of falsified records. Once the market sense rot, her empire collapses under its own weight. She will be left with nothing." A low chuckle followed Nathan's cruel satisfaction spilling out. "I want to see her face then." That false confidence shattered into dust. The sound of their voices twisted in my chest. I forced myself back a step, then another, each retreat silent but urgent. My thoughts reeled, colliding with one another until clarity finally burned through. Richard had never meant partnership. His toast, his softened eyes, his practiced words, nothing but theater. To him I was not a daughter worth honoring, but a rival to be crushed. For Nathan I was not even that. I was a target, a threat to his ego, an obstacle to his narrative as heir. Their alliance was sealed not by respect for one another but by hatred of me. And I knew then, with a sharp, undeniable certainty, that their scheme was already set in motion. My chest rose and fell in uneven bursts as I steadied myself in the empty corridor. The temptation to collapse under the weight of betrayal clawed at me, but another force took root instead, stronger, colder. I would not allow their plot to bloom. They had declared their next move. That gave me the advantage. I would not be the prey in their story. I would be the hand that turned the board, the voice that cut through their lies. This time I would strike before they even had the chance to release their poison. And when the reckoning came, it would not be my name tarnished in the headlines. It would be theirs. That night sleep eluded me. I lay awake in the dark, the poisonous whispers I had overheard between Richard and Nathan gnawing at my mind. Their plan was clear soil my company's name, drag my reputation through the mud, and cripple me before I had the chance to solidify my standing. Once years ago, that kind of threat would have crushed me, sending me into silence and submission. But not anymore. The timid girl they had mocked was gone. In her place stood a woman tempered by fire of her own making. And this time I would strike first. By morning, determination had steadied my pulse. I found myself in a small cafe tucked between glass towers in downtown Houston. The scent of roasted beans and the quiet hum of early chatter softened the tension pressing on me. Karen, my attorney and the steady hand who had guided me through storms since the fragile first months of my startup, slid into the seat across from me. She listened without interrupting, her pen scratching furiously across the lined pages of her worn leather notebook as I recounted every word of Richard's scheming. When I finished, she leaned in, lowering her voice. "Olivia, if they spread false information, we can sue them until they bleed. But there's a sharper blade we can use. If we expose their scheme before they make their move, they will be the ones standing trial in the court of public opinion." Her eyes met mine, steady and unflinching. The thought sparked like dry tinder inside me, dangerous yet exhilarating. I reached across the table, clasping her hand tightly. No words were needed. The slight nod between us sealed an unspoken pact. We would not just defend, we would let them step into their own trap. Later that afternoon, I sat with Uncle Robert on the back porch of his modest home, the hum of cicadas filling the heavy Texas air. I told him everything, each detail of what I had overheard. When I finished, silence stretched between us, thick with years of disappointment and grief. Finally he spoke, his voice slow and weary, carrying the weight of battles fought and lost. "Your father will never stop Olivia. He has built his life on crushing anything that stands in his way. But if you are ready, then I will stand with you." It is time the truth came to light in front of everyone. His words sank deep. I realized then that this was no longer just about protecting my company's reputation or my financial empire. It was about reclaiming dignity, about justice long denied, about fighting back against the chains they had wrapped around me since childhood. Karen wasted no time. She drew up the legal documents, sharp and precise, every clause a shield. She gathered evidence, valuation reports, contracts, verified accounts that shone a light on the true worth of what I had built. Simultaneously, she began reaching out to a handful of journalists, those rare few whose names still carried the weight of integrity. It was a simple strategy on paper, yet dangerous. If Richard released his lies, we would respond immediately with the truth, backed by documents, corroborated by outside voices, and most damning of all, the recording. I pulled out my phone that evening, replaying the file I had captured. Richard's voice, cold and deliberate, plotting to destroy me. Nathan's snarl, eager to see me humiliated. Their words filled the room around me, sharp and unmistakable. Each sentence was a hammer blow against the facade they had so carefully constructed. My chest tightened, my heart racing, but beneath the rush of adrenaline, an unexpected calm settled over me. This was no longer fear. This was clarity. As dusk fell, I sat in my office, the humble space that had witnessed every step of my journey, from nights when I wondered if I could pay my employees to mornings when contracts worth millions landed on my desk. Outside Houston glowed in ribbons of gold and silver, the skyline buzzing with restless energy. I set the leather briefcase beside me, the same one that once carried dreams too fragile to show anyone. Inside now were not only the documents that proved the worth of my company, but something far more powerful, the unvarnished truth of their betrayal. I leaned back, letting the weight of it all settle in. My reflection caught faintly in the glass pane of the window. A whisper escaped me, not for the city below, for the two voices I longed for most, my mother and my grandfather. Tomorrow I will finish this. The night pressed close around me, yet for the first time in years, I felt no fear of what it held. Instead, I welcomed it, because I knew what awaited on the other side of dawn, not another retreat into silence, but the moment I would rise and force them to confront the very truth they had tried to bury. The following morning, the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, which only hours ago had echoed with the laughter of champagne-soaked wedding guests, became something else entirely. This brunch, always disguised as a cheerful family gathering, was in truth a boardroom with linen tablecloths, a place where fortunes were measured, alliances tested, and scars reopened. The chandeliers glittered with cold indifference as I walked in, my worn leather briefcase pressed against my side. Richard sat at the head of the table, posture as commanding as ever, though I noticed his hands tremble slightly when he adjusted his tie. Beside him, Nathan wore the mask of arrogance, but his darting eyes betrayed the unease beneath. Around them, uncles, cousins, and a handful of business associates murmured, each carrying their own private loyalties. Richard rose, his voice deep, warm, and utterly insincere. "Today I want to bring clarity," he announced, scanning the room with the ease of a practiced actor. "There have been rumors regarding Olivia's company, whispers of inflated valuations, questionable accounting. This family values transparency." Nathan leaned forward, his voice harder, sharper. "That's right. We will not allow her little startup to turn into a public embarrassment. Walker dignity must remain intact." The room stirred with murmurs, heads nodding, lips pursing in agreement. This was the ambush they had orchestrated the moment they would brand me a fraud. I rose slowly, heels striking the marble floor with a steady rhythm. I placed my phone on the polished table, its black screen reflecting the faces around me. My eyes locked on Richard, then Nathan. My voice came out calm, steady, and strong enough to cut through the noise. "How fortunate," I said evenly, "because I too have something to share. This is a recording. Last night, Richard and Nathan conspired to fabricate lies to spread false reports that my company was built on deception." I tapped the screen. Richard's plodding voice and Nathan's bitter eagerness spilled into the room. Word by word, their scheme unfolded before the entire assembly. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. A cousin shifted uncomfortably. Uncle Robert slammed his palm against the table with a crack that cut through the air. "Enough," he thundered. "The truth is plain. Olivia is no fraud. She is the victim of her own father and brother." Nathan shot to his feet, his face crimson. "This is fake. She set us up." Richard tried to steady himself, but sweat ran down his brow. "Olivia, you don't know what you're doing. You will destroy this family." I turned to him, my gaze unwavering, my voice full of steel. "No, Father. You and Nathan are the ones tearing this family apart. I am saving it." With deliberate care, I reached into my leather briefcase and drew out the thick file I had carried for years. I raised it high so that the sunlight streaming through the tall windows glinted across its embossed cover. "This," I declared, "is the truth." Verified assets. Contracts signed by 3 major venture firms. $95 million in legally documented wealth. My voice. My power. And from this day forward, I will use both to protect the legacy of my grandfather, not the lies that have poisoned it. The room broke into gasps, hurried whispers, and then clapping, tentative at first, then louder. Richard's shoulders sagged for the first time in my life, the weight of his own deceit dragging him down. Nathan stumbled back, words failing him. Uncle Robert moved to my side, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "You've done it, Olivia," he said quietly, his voice breaking with pride. "You've brought them to justice." I closed my eyes and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. For years I had been branded useless, silence diminished. But in that moment, standing tall before those who had doubted me most, I knew that label had been burned away forever. If you have ever been rejected by those who should have stood by you, remember this: your worth does not vanish simply because they refuse to see it. True family can be chosen, and self-respect is built step by step. Have you ever faced that kind of dismissal? How did you find your way through it? Share your story in the comments. And if my words resonate with you, stay with us for more stories of truth and resilience. Sometimes the people who truly see your value are not the ones you expected, but the ones who accept you without